name is Robert Nashak. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Survios, Inc. We are a VR company based in Culver City, and I'll show you a little video of what we do, just to get started with some visuals. This was a Canadian TV show that came to interview us a year and a half ago when we had what I call an experiential proof of concept.
Now, he's obviously fully engaged. How is he staying within this space? Because it seems like he would just be going crazy, just knocking everything over around the office here.
Well, there's a virtual force field that we can't see, but he'll actually see it as he walks closer to the edge of the play space.
So just in case you didn't catch all that, Nathan and his team have created a video game where your entire body is 100% immersed and you can move around totally free. Now, this has never been done before, and I get to test it out.
The Survios experience really makes you feel that natural human fear. It's really a primal instinct that you kind of feel when you're in the system because it activates your fight or flight response.
All right, so I can't wait to get hooked up and fight off some zombies.
Okay, then he goes in and has a really good time. So that's the end of that story. I just wanted to share that with you, just give a little intro of what we're up to. Our whole thing is we've been developing hardware and software to create full-bodied, immersive, wireless VR. And this is something that we are very passionate about, and passionate about VR in general. Our team comes out of the mixed reality lab where Palmer Luckey came out of and has been thinking about VR for 3 to 4 years now. So we are very, very, very lucky today to have an extremely distinguished panel who have been thinking about VR for similar lengths of time from very distinguished companies. What I'm going to do now is go down the line and ask them to quickly introduce themselves for about a minute. What's their position? What's their company? And then what we'll do is we'll go down the row again and do a little bit more of a deep dive into what they're up to. My goal for this panel, and I hope you guys and all of you are in it with me, is let's cut through the BS. Let's try to get real about VR. What's happening? What's going to happen? What do we think is fluff? What do we think is actually like on the horizon? And then also we'll do some predictions about the future. But let's try to speak the truth today about VR. So before we do that, let's speak the truth about each other. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Katie Kulik, and I work for CBS. And I sit in the interactive division. So CBS owns 25 different websites.
But on
in
the
world
Proton
that I live in is the digital interactive world. And we think about virtual reality across all of our publishing platforms. And I think what's actually really cool about VR specifically is it's one technology that really threads across everything and gives us a reason to work more on the broadcast side, on the network side, on the digital side, on the local side. It's something that's really important to everyone at the organization. One of our biggest websites is one called CNET, and I'd place money that everybody in this room, whether you realize it or not, at some point have been on CNET when you are about to make a technology purchase for a phone, a TV, a refrigerator, a blender. Because we're about 6 times bigger than our next closest competitor in the technology review and information and news space, we really get to see trends before they hit mainstream. And it's a lot about what we discuss out in the marketplace. So we've been excited about and seeing the trend of VR for probably, as you mentioned, the last 3 years, along with things like autonomous driving, wearables, the smart home. And as we look at all these trends that are about to hit mainstream, VR is the one that's really on, as probably all of you are well aware, really on the precipice of becoming a major consumer focus and entity. And this November 9th, when Samsung and Oculus release their new consumer Gear VR for $99, we really anticipate seeing a big push in the consumer space. So I'll talk in more detail about some of the projects we're working on, but we're really excited to be here and are thinking about this a lot.
Great. Daryl?
Hi, Daryl Sartain with AMD. For most of you, hopefully, know who AMD is. We make processors. We also have the graphics business. So in the PC space, we have the Radeon graphics business. For us, VR is a major opportunity, a major business shift. Our belief is that it is real, that it's here. From my role, my function within AMD, I'm the director of virtual reality, so I essentially manage or deal with everything outside the company, all external partners, hardware partners, content, in some cases studios. So our goal is to learn, understand what the trends are, and For us, because of our lead time for silicon and for software development, we generally have to develop or plan to develop as much as 3 years in advance. So it's very critical to us to understand what the ecosystem is doing and be on top of that. So I spend most of my time traveling around the world, meeting with various partners, trying to understand and help set our roadmap.
That's great.
My name's Miles, and I've been in this industry for about 10 years with immersive media, and our legacy started in the military. We were behind Google, Street View, and so forth. And just recently we formed a joint venture with Digital Domain, a company called IM360, which is really focused on media and entertainment and the VR space, in particular in AR, but in creating immersive experiences for entertainment. And we really see this as an opportunity in terms of the true convergence between what is computer-generated live action and gaming really coming together to reshape the next generation studios. So.
Excellent. Thank you, David.
I'm David Levitt. I'm CEO and co-founder of Pantomime Corporation. In the early 90s, I was on a team at VPL Research that invented virtual reality in a very different landscape where a 20th century landscape where there weren't computers and mobile computers everywhere. And things have changed a lot since then. At Pantomime, we've invented something that brings virtual reality much closer to consumers by allowing them to reach in with any mobile device that's already in their pocket. Reaching into virtual worlds is just going to come online middle of next year for most virtual reality systems. But for Pantomime, it's already here, and you'll see a little video of that. But it's very exciting because there's difficulty seeing how quickly people are going to adopt head-mounted displays. But if you can reach into shared virtual worlds and have the head-mounted display be optional, the VR headset, then it can be much more quickly adopted by hundreds of millions of consumers, much more mobile, and much more accessible. We view ourselves as a kind of on-ramp to virtual reality for consumers.
Thanks. Neville.
Hi, my name is Neville. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Weaver. We're a technology startup here based in Venice, California, and we're primarily looking at investments in technology, content, and also really thinking about the community and what this new community of VR creatives that's emerging. So we've had the good fortune to be involved very early on in VR and having access to the various devices, from the Samsung Gear having a launch title on that device, through the HTC Vive, and also working with Oculus Rift and Sony, and sort of really thinking through how audiences are going to be entertained on this new platform, and kind of thinking through how we are going to enable a content explosion across these various headsets. So that's our focus.
Thank you.
I'm also Miles Perkins from Jaunt VR. And basically for Jaunt, it's an end-to-end solution for creating virtual reality, cinematic virtual reality, we refer to it as, or live action. What brought me to this field personally, I had a background at Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic. I've been aware of virtual reality for a very long time, since the early 90s. But having this proliferation and this device that's in everyone's pocket, 1.7 billion smartphones that are basically VR capable, it makes it something that's kind of undeniable that we're going to be consuming this medium. The medium, I don't think it is cinema. I don't think it is television. I think it's its own thing. And Jaunt is here to try to find that way and collaborate with storytellers, whether we're talking about narrative story or travel or whatever the vertical is, to find its way and really bring this to consumers worldwide. One thing that, just to point out right now, and maybe it can kind of kick things off, is today there are just a couple articles about Google Cardboard shipping 1 million cardboards on November 8th in the New York Times, flat packed in. This is something that is, it's not a question of whether or not VR is going to take off. it is. It's here. It's now. And we hope to bring content to people really through those distribution channels.
That's great. So as you can see, we have a very diverse and extremely, well-placed to give you good insights panel. What I'd like to do is have you all dive a little bit deeper into the particular projects you're working on to give us all a taste of what cutting-edge folks like yourselves are actually really sincerely and deeply into and up to. So why don't we just start again with Katie and go down the line.
Sure. Well, I think I love the way that Miles said it, because I think it's one of the most interesting and coolest parts about working with VR, which is the collaboration of storytelling. I think I'm a publisher. So CBS publishes content, and we publish amazing premium quality content. And we do it in our own worlds often, where we're creating these stories that are interesting, exciting, an escape for people, riveting, makes you want to binge watch. But I think what's really fun about VR is it is allowing us to partner with other really creative people like John, Weaver, IM360. We've done awesome projects with all of them, which really opens us up to new ideas and new ways of doing and thinking, and that's what's really incredible that we see about VR.
Can you describe one of those projects?
Yeah, so I'll tell you about two of them. So one is, we have hundreds of editors all over the world in a couple of key passion areas. One is gaming and the other one is technology. And one of the things our users say to us most frequently is, what was it like when you were there? And they really have this great desire. They're super passionate about either gaming or tech, and they have this great desire to really be able to experience it in a realistic way if they can't be at E3 or be at CES. So from an event or almost a trade show standpoint, we think that's a really great way for us to bring our content to users who are super passionate about that topic. So at E3, we partnered with IM360, and we had our editors doing a virtual tour of the show. And so our users got to see like how long the lines were for Oculus Rift and what it was like behind the scenes, and really get to experience new games in ways that they couldn't otherwise have done. The second one is more from a brand standpoint. So much of our business is ad supported, and we have really deep relationships with all the world's largest marketers. And there's this real quest for, how do I tell my brand story in a more engaging way to users who are super engaged in whatever content it is that you're creating. So we worked with Weaver and another really creative group called the Uprising Creative, who are headquartered here in LA, to create a VR comedy short with Kenan Thompson from Saturday Night Live. And it was really more of a B2B focused initiative. We wanted to show marketers that it's not as hard as you think to create really compelling content in virtual reality. It can be funny and engaging, and it's an incredible experience for the user to see your message in a way that's deeper and richer than they could see anything else. And I think that's another really interesting kind of offshoot from all of this. So it's consumers really being immersed and feeling empathy around whatever the content is, and then it's an amazing opportunity for marketers to weave in an authentic way into that experience.
Great, thanks. Daryl?
Yeah, so we had, actually let me make one quick comment. In some ways I think there's a fairly significant not polarization, but segmentation of what VR is. And just to be clear, at AMD, we fundamentally believe both are very critical. One being the mobile, the other being the high-end, PC-based VR. And the reason I make that distinction is because what we are learning in this throughout this process is that how you develop and what experience you try and achieve is largely dependent on which of those two you're going to go after. So if you're using a mobile device, a handset, then you're limited, at least today, you're limited in how much processing power you have, and therefore what kind of experience you can give. One example might be that you're going to have very little, if any, interactivity available to the user. So, as you may imagine, for AMD, our focus, at least today, our focus is the PC-based or the higher-end, more compute-intensive. And to that end, we've done a couple of projects. We were actually currently working and discussing on a number of other projects. But for E3, we had collaborated on two different projects. One, Wright Brothers' recreation of their first flight, and a second one was with GE Medical for what was called Neuro. Kite and Lightning team created this. And so both of them were intended to show non-gaming aspects to VR, because we think that, at least in the PC space, there's a general belief that the PC VR means gaming. We don't. We think that PC is, that the platform itself is a perfect venue for entertainment of all kind, for education, for medical, for industry. And so we worked on both those projects to provide that visibility, that opportunity or understanding. But I will say that again, in the PC venue or in the headset interactivity, that type of venue, today we're seeing the headset or the VR experience requiring something on the order of 8 teraflops of processing power. And our belief is that in time, before this all maybe hits stability, flattens out a bit, we're probably looking at a petaflop of processing power. Forgive me if that's maybe not meaningful to some of you, but what it means to us is the part of the reason why the industry has taken this long to get here is because that's an enormous amount of processing power. And our roadmap and our goals, and I think our industry is ready to push this forward and see what we can do creatively and what markets we can address with this as we go forward.
Great, thanks. Miles?
Sure. I think there's basically this a bit of a three-legged stool. The whole VR space, number one, you have to have technology that works and support it, whether it's on the mobile side or through the high-powered desktop. Number two, you need compelling content and great stories, and it's got to be immersive stories. It's different than framing up a traditional 2D. And then the third leg is a business plan and a strategy that's going to really take this beyond just a flash in the pan. And I think there's a couple of different things. Number one, on the tech side, there's, we mentioned the New York Times as an example. We've been kind of focused our whole area around pipeline and making these things simple. So we actually provide the back-end distribution server and the client for that application. So it makes it simple for them to take their content, however they create it, getting great content creators like Verse and people like that. Chris can upload their content easily. They can send their editors out and have that go out and play on any platform. So the tech piece is getting there, and I'm confident we'll have more memory, more chip processing power to address those issues.
Can you describe the New York Times project?
Well, it comes down to it is a VR strategy they'll be launching and putting out 1 million cardboards. And essentially what we've done is built a whole back-end client or server architecture to be able to stream full 360 video, CG, whatever content it may be, and render that out to whatever device. Specifically focused on a cardboard application. I think they're shipping 1 million of them. Yep. And then they're also, from a content creation standpoint, what they're doing is going out and creating specific content that will launch with this, but then have a regular flow of content that will, whether it's created by their editors running around putting stuff together or professionally put together content. The third leg to this is then going to be making sure you have a monetization strategy that's going to pay for this. And, we believe that, yes, right now, there's, a lot of people who are building experiential campaigns and so forth. So, whether it's, AT&T sponsoring the stuff you do with Conan O'Brien or, Nike doing the Neymar effect and things like that. Those are great projects and great experiences. But the longer term as we go forward with this is really tying in a VR experience. How do you start to monetize this and create those same sponsorship opportunities so that it's a great experience and people are going to pay for it? Or
Great.
Somebody's going to pay for it.
All right, super helpful. David.
So having been one of the developers in the earliest days of VR, it's interesting to see the transition. Back when we created the VPL system, we didn't feel comfortable calling it reality if it wasn't shared. And we didn't feel it and it had to be interactive. Our first product was the Data Glove, and so reaching in and sharing in networked worlds were key to the way we were doing things. Nowadays, those are much less common, and we've sort of got a lot of great new displays, but those other elements aren't really there. Maybe it's a good time to show my video.
Okay.
Pantomime offers augmented and virtual reality for today's world of ubiquitous and mobile computing. It's virtual worlds for the rest of us, with no headsets or glasses needed. Pantomime software lets anyone look around and reach into virtual and augmented reality worlds using the tablets, phones, and computers we already have, by immersing those computers themselves in shared virtual worlds. Pantomime's patented technology provides fast, accurate 3D tracking of popular mobile devices using their built-in motion sensors and models of how they're shaped and physically supported. Balanced on a table, each tablet or phone offers a vivid, physically realistic, interactive tabletop view into augmented and virtual reality worlds. Held in your hand, with a thumb on the screen, it becomes a gyro-accurate 3D game paddle, offering a beautiful view into virtual worlds directly through it. And it's networked over Wi-Fi, so you can play with other people and devices can cooperate. A Mac becomes a new kind of augmented reality game console that turns any iPhone or iPad into a powerful 3D controller. Pantomime is completely mobile, with no external cameras or anything else to set up. Without your face block, you can see the room and the people around you in the real world, and you can see your animated hands as they interact in the virtual world. Pantomime is designed so any computer you own becomes a portal into interactive virtual worlds. And of course, for people and applications that need a super wide-angle stereo view of the scene, we'll support virtual reality headsets too. So Pantomime may be a kind of consumer on-ramp for the emerging virtual reality industry. Virtual worlds for the rest of us.
Great. So tell us a bit more about sort of applications of this technology.
So the problem that it solves is you'd like to be able to socialize and you'd like to be able to reach into virtual reality worlds and decide whether or not you were going to put on an immersive headset or if you're going to be using some of the other devices around you. Professor Mark Weiser, who's known in computer science as the father of ubiquitous computing, used to think of virtual reality as by funneling all of the world through one device. It's a little bit like saying, like someone 120 years ago saying, someday there will be a personal motor, and there'll be pulleys to every room so that you can operate the different things that you need. And ubiquity is really very different, where there's basically virtual reality worlds tend to ignore all the devices that are already surrounding us, and what Pantomime's approach is, let's recruit those into, every device with a screen can in principle become a view into virtual reality world that lets us look around, as well as, since they're mobile and have motion sensors, ways to reach into virtual reality worlds. In addition, not only is it more social, but it's so much more accessible to consumers to have the option of looking at the worlds through your mobile device or looking at something on your Apple TV or what have you. So in the project you saw on the screen there perhaps you could see insects attacking an iPad or jumping up on a table. The various participants in the room can crush those bugs with their mobile devices as well as look directly through them and see the world there. So they don't necessarily need a head-mounted display. If they have one, it's that much easier for them to turn around and to excel at that kind of a game experience. But there are a multiplicity of ways in, and most people won't have an augmented, head-mounted display that they necessarily want to put on, either because they don't have one with them, can't afford one, or don't want the social cost, where they can't make eye contact or can't look over one another's shoulder and really enjoy being in the room with other people. It'll be a while before networked virtual reality is so commonplace that people can feel they're fully present in the other room because everyone else is wearing one.
That's really interesting. Let's move on to Neville next. Thank you very much, David.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if it's difficult to talk about VR unless you've actually experienced it. And that's
how many people here have experienced some form of VR?
Yeah, great, terrific. So it's a much easier conversation to have. so on the one hand, yes, VR AR, remarkable new device, allows and affords an experience for consumers that is quite remarkable relative to previous screens. But at the same time, as you're saying, it's no different than any other. It's another screen. It's another device that you can program to. So as we're thinking about, VR AR, based here in LA, looking at sort of narrative, starting from narrative and story, and looking at ways that we can engage either brands or talent in order to craft experiences that really are well suited to these devices. So there's 2 or 3 examples which I'll share with you. And we very much also think of VR AR being both a PC-based platform and mobile. We think both are very relevant. We think there's monetizable experiences to be built across both those headsets. So on the mobile side, we're collaborating with Samsung and Skybound, which is a company here with Robert Kirkman, and sort of creating a multi-episode experience where we're sort of really taking the notion of sort of script-based narrative and introducing elements of interactivity that lend themselves to the fact that you're inside of a headset where you are a participant in the experience. And your participation may be as simple as looking around and choosing your viewpoint, but that's already a significant level of engagement that you don't typically have with linear narrative.
Is this, which IP is it, Walking Dead?
No, it's a different IP. It's going to be announced shortly.
Okay.
Another example, another project that we worked on the PC side, which we're probably most known for, is called The Blue, which is an underwater simulation experience. We had a version of it that showcased on the HTC Vive. It was demoed first at the MWC conference when the Vive was announced, and also at GDC. And in that case, we're really taking principles of linear storytelling, combining them with learnings from game design to allow you to have encounters with underwater creatures in a way that you simply couldn't have, where you get to literally have eye-to-eye contact with a giant blue whale as it swims into your space. And kind of thinking through what's special and unique about the new medium, such as a sense of scale that you can have once the media is literally surrounding your face and you're in the middle of it, versus looking at it out there framed on a screen. And that project we're turning into a launch title across the various PC platforms starting at the end of this year, and then on the Rift at the end of Q1, and on the Sony Morpheus at the end of Q2, or thereabouts when those platforms actually launch. So that's another example of premium content that we believe consumers will be compelled enough to buy and actually pay for. And lastly, another example is we're trying to reach out to incumbent directors here in Hollywood who are taking to this medium, and we're sort of creating a forum of collaboration where we're working with a variety of directors that come to us and are learning about what works and what doesn't. We're using a camera or CG systems. Part of what we're doing as a company is doing a bunch of experimentation. There's a lot to learn. So we're trying to sort of iterate and learn and make mistakes and kind of really understand what really works, what avoid, how do you not make people sick, which is a common theme that comes up.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's go down to Miles.
So yes, I think like some folks here, we have quite a few different projects that are going, but just to talk about a couple that are resonating.
Do you want to show the video first?
No, I'm okay. But just a couple that are resonating, I think, with audiences. One is in the news area or cause-based things. There's a sense of mindfulness that you have when you are in a VR experience where you are focused on what it is in a way that you're not walking down the street because you've decided to put this on your head. As a result, there are a couple things that happen in this space. Number one, you wind up with something that's very objective. You don't have a cameraman telling you who's framing something up, telling you how many people are in the room when there really aren't that many people in the room. You also don't have someone on the other end who's a director who's picking shots. So you have something that's objective. And then the second thing is because this is, I refer to it as a little bit of a brain hack. When you're in it and you're in a situation where there are other people, you feel a connection, and this is just a human part. We like to be in groups of people. That's the way we're wired. And VR allows you to have that connection. There's a human connection that you have that I experience in news or cause-based things. The next step there is you can ask someone to actually convert and do something right then and there. And this has been incredibly effective. So that's kind of one side. Another side is definitely on experiential things like music or things that brands really are liking, things that drive into what the brand is. Experience, we've done something with, of course, the North Face. And, this drives directly at their brand pillars. At the same time, it doesn't feel like a commercial. It makes you feel like you're there and you're having an experience. One other thing I want to say, I want to put a fourth leg on that stool. And I'm kind of touching on that here. The consumer. It's very important for us to understand the consumer. And I just have to say, there's something that I still struggle with, just, to talk about honesty here, is putting a bag over your head is not a normal thing to do. You know what I mean? Like in conferences, when we're doing demos and things, that is just a very, very unnatural thing to do. So I think we're going to find ways to share, find ways to put this in context. I agree that there's going to be a continuum. We see that right now, from mobile to the desktop. There are going to be different situations where you'll look at media. I mean, 2 years ago, when people started being on the subway and looking at linear content on their phones, that was the weirdest thing. But if you go in right now, everyone is doing it. It just needed the context. It needed to be socially okay to do it. And that, I think, is really going to be one of the, not necessarily a complete challenge, it's just going to take a little bit of time for us to find those places where we want to consume this media and where we want to share the media as well.
Great. So that's for me a very helpful introduction. These are experts in VR telling about what they're specifically up to. Let's dive in with a few questions, then we'll eventually turn it over to your questions in the audience. So I just want to ask the panel in general, VR adoption, right? It's not going to be about hardware. It's going to be obviously about content. Can you talk about what experiences you think are going to drive the kind of widespread VR adoption that you're all predicting will happen? Any thoughts?
Well, I think they are going to be those big experiences. I mean, we the one thing, and since we're here talking about Hollywood also, if we had a formula for making a movie, we'd have nothing but blockbusters all year. And there really isn't. There's not really a formula. I mean, there is a little bit of a formula for how to tell a story, but a really compelling story comes from a point of view. And I think it's going to take a compelling story, whether that's in news or it could be gaming or whatever it is. It's going to take one of those things, two of those things, where people say, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And I think, I have to say with the headset manufacturers and Google Cardboard, all of this becoming readily available, at least now people are going to know how to put it together and consume, and that's really exciting. But it is going to take content, compelling content to spread the word.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing that frankly surprised us, because I think gaming was sort of the obvious, and people, when they think about VR, they thought about gaming, but it was the things that were more in the news, and the Syrian refugee piece that really, it's this notion of empathy where one of our senior editors is this guy, Scott Stein, and he writes this great piece about testing out the Gear VR headset, lying in bed next to his wife who was reading a book. He puts the VR headset on and he's watching the Syrian refugee piece with tears streaming down his face, and his wife's looking at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? What are you doing? And he was even saying in this piece, like it took him by surprise that he was so emotional, but you feel like you're such a part of this 12-year-old's journey in a refugee camp because you look around and you're with her family. And so I think those pieces like that really take you by surprise, and then other people start talking about them, that's what will really become more viral, if you will, around adoption of more of this content.
Other thoughts on the panel? Neville?
Yeah, I think in some respects, similar to other media, we think audiences will follow similar patterns so if you're a fan of horror, you're going to go seek out horror-based content. If you're a fan of your music band, guess what? There's going to be a VR experience that involves your favorite band. If you like sci-fi action movies, sure enough, there will be some compelling VR content that will absorb you. That's based on current IP or new IP. So and that's rolling out, right? There's multiple companies producing all kinds of content in different genres and categories. So I don't think there's much mystery there.
Okay, that's good. And David, you spoke about networked play or networked experiences and that sense of being with other people and social experiences in VR. I got to say, we deliver that in my company right now, and it is magic. It's like a Neil Armstrong moment when you are in VR with someone else. There's nothing like it. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two things going on, because there's this great content and all these great tools for creating immersive headset content, and the interactive side and the reaching in and the sharing side isn't really going to be prominent until next year. But I've handed our software to my nephews, and they say, oh, I want to be in that world with you again. That reaching, that's really what gets them excited. In a way, the content, just throwing a ball and, doing the kinds of things that you do in Angry Birds and whatnot, those will all be fantastic in 3D. But having a game of catch and playing with his cousin is just a much higher level of thrill, and you can just see it in his spine, the way people interact in his shared world. So networked shared worlds are going to be huge in this, but also, people said from the beginning, oh, this is going to be a little like games, but we're not even at the beginning of that experience, because it's really mostly about looking around at worlds now. I think when this really catches fire with consumers, it's going to be because they can interact in some significant way, and the immersive headset experience makes it even better. If you're, in the example you saw, if you're being attacked by scary monsters or insects on a table, that's one thing, and people can be interacting and sharing in that world. But if there's a jaunt cinematic recording in the background of the fire ants approaching from the distant jungle and whatnot, then you really or if something's sneaking up behind you and you won't know it unless you actually turn around, then the value of the headset in the already interactive consumer world becomes clear. And I think that's why we think of the on-ramp process. We don't, there's the haves and have-nots accidentally, sort of. Google Cardboard is starting to change that, but really there's a pretty big wall between people interacting in game and mobile experiences and people with headsets, and to have environments where people are interacting in an Apple TV or they're interacting with mobile, and other people in the same world are having a better experience because they can see all the way around easily, I think that's where you're really going to have an industry that's catching fire.
Did you have a thought, Mike?
Sure. I guess there are a couple of things in terms of just building on that concept of, this is much more of an evolution than a revolution. I don't think anybody knows clearly exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to evolve very quickly. There are a lot of neat technologies that are coming out, but when cardboard, they ship 1 million cardboards, that's great, but there's going to be probably 10, 20 million people downloading the app on a mobile device and engaging that way. And so I think as you see and you start to see how people start to interact with this technology and capability, it also ties back to the story piece. And that whole idea of, how do you communicate a story? Because when I'm on the subway, I'm not going to be able to spin around and look around, and I'm not going to put a headset on and leave my computer sitting there and have it disappear. I'm going to, be in the real world. And I'm going to still want, the technology to guide me through the story. Show me the story, but let me engage when I want to engage. Let me engage the way I want to engage. And that's where I see that, the evolution of the technology is really, how do you tell that story? How do you make it something that is, sit back, entertain me, and guide me through the story, but when I want to take over control, whether I take it, with my finger, with my headset, or with my remote control and, start to pan left, pan right, I can manage through that story. So, and I think that piece of it is going to become more and more important.
So just to speak of revolutions, Peter Guber at NAB said this, what we have on our hands today, speaking of VR, is a revolution, and revolutions can be lethal. But in that chaos lies all of our opportunity. So one thing I want to touch on before we turn it to the audience is the very practicality of selling VR into these organizations, particularly because VR is going to go through ups and downs. We're in a bit of a honeymoon period now. We're probably going to have a FUD moment, a fear, uncertainty, doubt moment, when the Wall Street Journal digital section starts talking about people getting sick, whatever it's going to be. There's going to be these moments. And, Katie selling into CBS VR.
Always looking for ways to tell our stories better and more engaging, looking for more exciting ways to tell stories. So to us, it's more of a curiosity thing, and it's this path to being able to have a richer experience for our audience. So it feels very natural and something that we're just genuinely really excited about bringing to life more. There
must have been a time when you were excited about 3D television as well, though, right?
I think, we've discussed that a lot, and I think this has been different from the beginning. I mean, it isn't like this just started 2 years ago, but it definitely has been a topic of discussion. But I think we see, like I said at the very beginning, we see so many consumers so interested by this, and I think the feeling is so different. I bought 20 Gear VR headsets and gave them to my sales team and said, when you're out in the field pitching CNET, put these headsets on people, because we see trends before they hit mainstream. What better way to kind of display that than to actually show people? So I've probably seen hundreds of people all around the world put that headset on for the first time, my kids included, and when you see these people's reaction, you realize it's different than 3D TV.
Great.
This is something different.
Couldn't agree more. Anyone else want to speak to this?
Yeah, so the point about 3D TV and about VM trend, and as a gaming trend, we simply need to have the right hardware and market the traditional channels. What we have learned, and what we learned early on actually, and started spending a great deal of money and time and energy in, is VR as a medium, as a method of consuming, can be, frankly, I'm convinced will be, a completely different medium than what we initially thought it was as a company. So yes, there was a challenge selling it in, but once we sold it in, today our executive team are fully committed to this, because done right, we think this changes our entire industry. Our belief is that, again, we're very strongly supportive and very much believers that the mobile VR is a real segment, and it has its value. Where 3D audio, and so far what we've seen when we've done demos with different events, is when people can when people can put themselves into the environment that you're presenting to them, when they can believe that they're a part of it, you've got them. Whatever it is, if you can put people into a scenario where they feel like they're part of it, whether it's a movie, whether it's a game, whether it's whatever, that's when people start to change their perception of VR, and their reactions when they come out of it are just, they're astounded. So I think revenue is easily, achieved if you can find the right content.
So any other thoughts before we get the audience part of this?
Yeah, super quick. So for us, the challenge with selling VR is...
Can you get closer to the mic?
Sure. There's three challenges that we see. One is there's a real safety issue when you're covering your eyes with a headset, especially if you're tethered. And the hardware manufacturers, I think, are doing a really good job in being thoughtful about working through that and setting sort of consumer guidelines for how to engage with the device. Once you're past safety, there's a comfort issue. How comfortable are these devices? How much time do people want to spend in an actual headset? The form factor is evolving. That's also being addressed, but that is another real sort of barrier to adoption and to selling. And then once you're past that, there's the social aspect of, are you going to feel awkward wearing a headset when you're in a public space, etc., which will also sort of unravel over time. But those are sort of three real challenges, we think, in terms of adoption. That said, unlike 3D glasses, the payoff for the consumer and the emotional return you get from a truly captivating VR experience is so high that we're seeing that consumers will gladly work through the safety issues, the social awkwardness issues, because the payoff is high enough. And so that's where I think this is a completely different situation than anything that's right there.
Something I would like to point out also, when motion pictures even came on the scene, it was 11 years before it really turned into anything. What we were looking at, and the other thing is there was no vocabulary. They were all locked off shots initially. They very slowly learned that you could do a close-up, but it took a long time. Now, what we see right now, and I'm going to go back to human patterns. Things repeat themselves, but the frequency just gets so much tighter. So I see that in clothing styles all the time with my daughter. It's like we're in the 70s for a week, then we get into the 80s for the next week or whatever it is. But these things tighten up. And I believe right now is that we are just as they were in the at 1900, where we're figuring out what is the vocabulary of this, what works, what doesn't, where do I consume, is this something that is short? I mean, it was always short form then. I mean, everything was, well under 5 minutes. And then it got longer and longer over time as the vocabulary established itself. I think we're going to find that is going to repeat itself now. And again, it's a very, very different thing than an additive 3D thing. 3D is just additive. That's all. This is, when we talk about, you brought up sound. Sound is processed in our brains 10 to 100 times faster than visuals. It actually informs what we see. And they've done tests where a ball bounces in a room and it actually doesn't hit the wall. But if you add the sound, it does hit the wall. So there's some really interesting things about how we process information, and this new medium is really taking it to our senses in a big way.
I love
and it takes you to a whole nother level.
Yeah, I've never seen sound designers in my whole career so excited as they are now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing.
It's amazing. I mean,
so let's take some questions from the audience right now. Please, when you ask a question, speak very loudly. I'll repeat the questions if necessary.
Sure. Judge French from the next group. You just mentioned timescales tightening, which brings to mind the timescale of VR to AR types of transition. We're talking about two different environments, we're talking about two different ways to consume, but could you each speak about how you see VR's time and AR's emerging time, and how you see that rolling out and working between the two?
Personally, I think, and this is just totally my opinion of this, but I think for the next 2 years now, we're going to see VR. And we're going to start to establish things there. And then as the pipeline gets more robust for AR, I think you're going to start to see it creep in. And hopefully with new headsets that are more streamlined and will give you the ability to do both without being bulky, I think you'll start to see AR creep in. But AR is, to me, the best thing right now is that it's a very functional thing. It's a huge help. It could be a huge help in life. Just every point they're going to marry in a way where like you were talking about, where you do have this completely VR experience that AR is laid over the top that is so very interactive.
I'll kind of build on that. I think absolutely it's an inevitable technology, and whether it's VR, MR, AR, the adding of artificial intelligence into that and tying it into different platforms, all these lines are going to blur. And what you're going to see, I believe, is exactly what you were demonstrating in terms of different devices, different ways of interacting, and whether it's live action video or CG, and however it's.
Also, what your recommendations would be for someone who's interested in creating that kind of content.
Did you get the questions?
Sure.
So I'm going to make a real quick comment to that, but understand that I come from a silicon company. My perspective is perhaps slightly different, and that is, to us, at least today, our belief is that the scripted aspect of this, our belief is that a lot of thought needs to go into how immersive VR is created. If it is simply thrown out there as another, the comment earlier about 3D was just a layer. If VR is thrown out there as simply another method of display.
That's different. And take, with that end goal in mind when you start.
There are some amazing opportunities. I love linear storytelling. I'm not so much an interactive gamer kind of thing. I do agree that an interactive for me in VR is being able to completely look around. That's the level of interactivity I like. However, there are things that we're going to be able to do with a story that it's going to be able to branch within the same amount of time. So an example would be if you were to look at one person here and someone was to look at another person, I might be able to serve up something very different to each one of those people, but you don't necessarily know that I did. It still feels very linear to you. And so therein lies a great opportunity for a scriptwriter to do something that's a little like Crash or something, but actually happens in the same time frame. And so I think there's some thoughts that if someone understands this medium or tries to start to understand the limitations and the opportunities, I think it'll be great for someone who's a great storyteller, because great storytellers are awesome, amazing.
I think some of the differences from standard fictional storytelling will push things a little bit more the way they are in a video game environment. Not to say it's a game, but just an exciting, a scary script, a well-written scary script is the same regardless of what kind of a camera you're using in the scene. We have a hilarious script with a Homer-like character reaching into a world and trying to shove a piece of nuclear material into something. That works whether they're on a small thing or seeing the entire reactor around them. So a great script has its own integrity, and but yeah, you can't use it's a little bit more like adapting the game environment than say a movie with transitions of that kind.
All right, any questions? Right here?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Shane Pace. I'm a media and technology psychologist and CTO of a startup with VR and AR. One of the biggest problems that we experience in psychology with VR especially is what you talked about, some of the perceptual and sensory effects that it causes. And that's really hardware-based at the moment. When you're talking about creating content for that hardware that has those built-in perceptual issues, what are you doing to consider the content you're devising for that so it helps you limit that potential for sensory perceptual issues such as VR sickness, eye strain, headaches, non-visual eye tracking, things like that?
One thing that I just think is really basic that, again, it just goes with our physiology is do not disconnect the brain from the body. Just whatever you can do, and that even has to do with latency and anything that you do. So I think there's some very basic rules, but the other thing here is that it's so early until vocabulary is also everything. I think there are some things that we're saying right now that you can't do that later on you will be able to do. And because people will be a little bit more used to it. I mean, it's like, if you're a fisherman, if I step on a boat, it's all over. But, someone who goes out all the time, they're totally at home, And I think things will slide around a bit.
Yeah, the other thing is there's enough, I think, already collective understanding in terms of the hardware specifications and certain guidelines in terms of how you create the content, that there really is no reason for people to be creating content that makes people sick.
Of course.
Right? So I think that having curiosity and kind of following those basic guidelines, I think there's a lot that can be done. And then actually playing into the fact that it is a very powerful medium. You can help people overcome phobias as well, and kind of really thinking through all of that.
Okay. If I may, real quick, I'll say that we have real concerns along that same vein, and have initiated some work and research with USC and with certain individuals who've been doing this field, VR and similar for PTSD and other types of rehabilitation. For that very reason, for the concern that there may be hidden results that we don't know. We need to know before that becomes impacts people.
Great. We have time for one more question in the back, please.
Can any of you identify specific characteristics that you think will separate good VR storytellers from great ones?
Separate the bad pretty quick. I think there are a bunch of different pieces. It's not, the story is the key thing, and the content is what it comes down to. But it's also going to be a lot of the other issues that we're touching on here of, frame rates and, how the latency of it, how it's all put together. It becomes a critical piece of what that content is and what the story is, but also the technology piece of giving the end user a good experience.
I wonder if we're going to get a lot of inspiration from theater directors, especially interactive theater directors, who have a spatial understanding built into their DNA, as opposed to maybe movie directors. In fact, James Cameron has come, not against VR, but he's kind of not interested in it. He says there's always going to be a need for fixed force perspective, edited linear content. So maybe that's where we'll start seeing some real creative stuff happening.
I think increasingly as physically realistic interactive worlds come in, we're going to see things more like Chuck Jones or Steven Spielberg style things, where you're in an environment where there's a lot of, a contraption-like environment, like Spielberg always sneaks in, where something that you touch affects a bunch of other things, and how that scene is laid out is a key part of why it works as suspense or works as comedy. So there's going to be the Spielberg of VR, and I think it's not going to be about looking around. It's going to be about the interactive physical parts of it. So it's really going to come online a year or so from now, and that's part of why we're so focused on the interactive physical realism side and just enabling or allowing the totally immersive side to be a part of that.
Well, and I'll say that our goal in all this is to make sure that the comments earlier, that the concerns about frame rates, about latency, what we call motion to photon, the movement of the head versus what shows up on your display, that all of those are absolutely non-issues. That in the end, this comes down to creative talent, which is something I have zero of, and being able, and empowering the creative, whether it's gaming or cinematic or anything else, but essentially putting that medium in the most viable method possible, back into the creative hands. But again, the storytelling method will be different. I think it's going to be everything. Everything you see in cinema today or in gaming today is going to be successful in VR.
Last word, different. Thank you, Daryl. Last word, Emil.
My guess is that the great ones are probably unknown today, and that the natives may be the ones that actually, unencumbered by previous.
Who are already living hybrid digital reality lives, yes. All right, well, I couldn't be more thrilled to host this conversation. Thank you, distinguished panel, and let's give them a big round of applause.